to do some of these civilian jobs and to make sure that they can aspire to be in the Space Force and to aspire to be in the DoD in different capacities as civilians. We've heard recent reports that because of the hiring freeze, that these young graduates from the Cyber Academy aren't able to get the jobs that they need to enter into Space Force, NRO, NGA, not NGA, that's the National Governors Association, NGA, are unable to do that. Do you have any insight into what we can do to unstick that pipeline that we're so desperate to try to grow?
Well, we were in a period of managed growth. The civilian workforce by the end of 25 was supposed to be almost 1,000 larger than it's going to end up being. That's a part of not just the incentives that we've given for people to resign or retire early. We've also we kind of stopped the growth that we had planned to accomplish these missions. And cyber defense is a perfect example of one of those missions that we've suspended hiring until we figure out exactly what the size of the civilian workforce is going to be, and then we will rebalance the force. Cyber is not going to go away. We need to make sure we're recruiting those people because that's a skill set we desperately need. And
General, do you know how long it will take to finish the assessment of the numbers of who you have and what you have and rebalancing the force? How long might that take? Because again, one of the challenges that we created the Cyber Academy to address is that onboarding took so long for organizations like NRO or CIA or other capacities that rely on cyber-heavy skill sets, that we would lose these extraordinarily gifted young people to the private sector. We've created the Cyber Academy specifically to ramp them on to public service. So there's an urgency, and if you have any estimate in times or any ways that you would suggest to the administration that we could maybe surge resources to get this done sooner than later.
I was really proud at how fast we were able to onboard our civilian hires. I thought the Space Force had done a nice job of reducing that timeline. The DoD is really looking at what the size of the civilian workforce is. And so as those incentives to reshape the workforce affect the Space Force, I'm not sure exactly where we're going to end up, what our final size is going to be. As soon as I understand what that size is, then we will redistribute and reallocate the civilian workforce as necessary.
Thank you. Thank you all for your service.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. Senator Budd, you are recognized, and you have the gavel for 5 minutes.
Understood. Thank you, sir. Again, thank you all for being here. I want to thank you in particular for your leadership, General Allvin, with communicating the need for more Air Force. It's something that I support and something that I agree with. You know, last month we received the Air Force's report to Congress, which lays out the plan to sustain and recapitalize the fighter fleet. The plan goes out, as you know, to 2035, and it hinges on production and procurement assumptions over the next 10 years in order to work. So in that sense, how important are the fighter production lines and stable funding to those lines in your effort to modernize the fleet?
You nailed it, Senator Budd. They're absolutely critical. That stable funding helps us not only understand how to develop the pilot pipeline, but where they're going to be stationed, the whole thing. It's critical.
So one thing that stuck out to me was the arrival of the F-35s at Lakenheath Air Base, and that once they're up and running, 2 Strike Eagle units will be returning stateside. So has a decision been made on where those aircraft will end up?
Senator, the final decision hasn't been made, but I will tell you that when we're looking at the right place to have them land, we are looking at, because those have the newer 229 engines in them, and so they're the more modern.
Versus the 220 engines.
Versus the 220 engines, and so understanding Seymour Johnson has the 220s, we're looking very closely at the opportunity because, of course, Seymour Johnson is going to be critical to the F-15E and EX community as far as the training unit and the operational unit for the E. So that certainly is it's an attractive landing spot right now. We haven't made that final decision, but it's pretty attractive.
General, as you know, Seymour Johnson, which you mentioned, it hosts both combat and training missions, and it's home to the oldest Strike Eagles in the fleet. So does the return of those Lakenheath jets, does it create flexibility for managing the F-15 fleet and keeping those missions alive?
It absolutely does, Senator. It does.
So if you were able to divest those oldest jets, those Dash 220 jets at Seymour Johnson, unencumbered by the current law, and replace them with newer ones, does that make it easier to sustain both the combat and the training missions at Seymour Johnson?
That absolutely does. It does, Senator.
Thank you. Now, I want to be supportive, and if there's common sense decisions that are held up by technicalities or factors outside of your control, I want to hear about it, and I'm willing to work with all of you on that.
Thank you, sir.
Secretary Meink, again, congratulations on your new role and your swearing in. So what can you tell us about the plan to re-optimize the Air Force for great power competition?
So I think it's kind of, as I mentioned in my opening comments, I think there's two things we have to look at. Is, we have to look at the near term Indo-Pacific theater and what we need to do there. And we've talked a little bit about that from a readiness perspective, how we're flowing more capability out there and dispersing that capability. I think in the near term, that is something we have to worry about. At the same time, there is modernization efforts we have going on across the service to be able to push deeper in there as China fields more and more capability. I think we talk a lot about modernization, but one of the things can maybe talk a little bit more about in this meeting is that in some cases, particularly in the Space Force, it's not just modernization, it's creation, right? It's new mission that we're not just modernizing. These are new missions that did not exist 4 or 5 years ago, right? So we're creating new missions, and that has to be done because those capabilities, those new missions are going to be critical, both in the Golden Dome for America, but also in the competition with China and other potential adversaries. So it's a mix of both of those things. It's maintaining readiness now. It's making sure our modernization and the creation missions we're creating are on schedule and deliver, and that's going to be a focus of mine. It's just execution. Have to execute to get those systems online.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. General Allvin, back to you. I'm interested in the deployable combat wing concept. It makes a lot of sense for a wing to train as a unit and then be able to deploy and fight together as a unit if called upon. As one of the first deployable combat wings, I'm particularly interested in what this means for Seymour Johnson. So will additional airmen need to be stationed there to support this concept?
Yeah, Senator, they will, because when we do that, when we ensure we have sequestered those to train as units to go and train how they may have to fight, we still need to ensure that the base is still taken care of. So we anticipate about 200 or folks or so more airmen coming in, and we have done sort of an advanced team to go and look and to ensure that everything is taken care of with the ability to house and feed and do all that sort of things with those additional airmen. I got to tell you, when we put out the call for airmen to volunteer to go to these deployable combat wings, we flooded the zone. There was a lot of airmen who are very excited about this concept, see themselves, rather than deploying as individuals, training as units and deploying as units. And I think Seymour Johnson is going to be the great recipient of that, and as sort of leading the charge for how the Air Force is going to do going forward. We're very excited.
Thank you, General. Chairman.
Yes, before I recognize Senator Duckworth, let's say this: we're going to get to everybody, but we're going to reconvene in the Senate Visitor Center, room 217, at 12:25. So people should be advised, and staff members should be advised. Senate Visitor Center, 217, 12:25. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Senator Hirono touched on this Qatari gift plane, and I wanted to follow up on it. Look, the bipartisan concern expressed in the lead up to and during today's hearing simply underscores how bizarre and disturbing it was to watch President Trump proudly defend his decision to create, at the very least, the pathetic appearance that our commander-in-chief can be bought by an ally of Iran and Hamas, all for the price of the Qatari royal family's luxury so-called palace in the sky. And that doesn't even address the outrageous reality that far from saving money, this unconstitutional action will not only cost our nation its dignity, but it will force taxpayers to waste over $1 billion in taxpayer dollars to overhaul this particular aircraft when we currently have not one, but two fully operational and fully capable Air Force One aircraft. Secretary Meink, I wrote a letter to you last week about the very real operational security risks involved in President Trump's unconstitutional proposal to accept a $400 million luxury aircraft from the Qatari royal family and retrofit it to serve as Air Force One. And I look forward to hearing from you and hearing your thorough response about what the Air Force has been directed to do to support this, but I have several questions for you here today. As you know, any platform used for presidential travel must be fully secure, survivable, and this is the important part, capable of supporting uninterrupted command and control under the most demanding conditions, including in the event of a nuclear crisis. This isn't just about ensuring presidential protection, though that is very important. This is about our national security and protecting all Americans from the dangers posed if the president's sensitive communications are intercepted or if he is out of contact, God forbid, with our nation's military during a crisis. Secretary Meink, General Allvin, do you concur that the upgrades required for a foreign-provided plane to meet the operational security standards of Air Force One would be significant?
Senator, thanks for the question. So the Secretary of Defense has directed the Air Force to basically start planning to modify the aircraft. We are postured to do that.
That's not my question. My question is, will you concur?
We will look at all of those. We will look at all of those. Well, we will have to look at all of those issues you just addressed in those modifications, Senator.
General Allvin, would you say that to upgrade a foreign aircraft to Air Force One standards would require significant modifications?
I align myself with the Secretary's opinion that we will be postured to make the modifications necessary.
That's not my question. My question is, do you concur that it would take significant modifications to take a civilian 747 and upgrade it to Air Force One standards?
So Senator, any civilian aircraft will take significant modifications to do so. And as I said, based on the Secretary's direction, we are postured and we're off looking at that right now, what it's going to take for that particular aircraft, right?
All right. If President Trump insists on converting this plane to a hardened Air Force One before 2029, I worry about the pressures you may be under to cut corners on operational security. I've already seen concerning press reports that requirements have been loosened for construction of 2 other Boeing 747-8s intended to modernize the Air Force One fleet that taxpayers have already been paying for to accelerate this delivery. Can I have your commitment, Mr. Secretary, that you will strongly advise the President against cutting any corners or reducing any requirements on operational security standards for any aircraft to be used as Air Force One?
So, Senator, I'm unaware of any requirements. Now, I've only been in the job 2 days, but I'm unaware of any requirement changes to the current program. And yes, we will, as we lay out the plan, we will make sure that we do what's necessary to ensure security of the aircraft. Right?
Do I have your commitment that you will advise the President not to reduce any requirements that will lower operational security for any aircraft to be used as Air Force One?
Yeah, Senator, I will be quite clear and discuss that with the Secretary up to the President if necessary if we feel there's any threats that we are unable to address.
If the President insists on this dangerous course of action, I urge you not to let this distraction, and it is a distraction, divert resources that would otherwise support delivering the 2 aircraft already under contract and paid for by American taxpayers in a manner consistent with our critical security standards to protect Air Force One from compromise, disruption, or attack. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would note, though, by the way, that Joe Biden designated Qatar as a major non-NATO ally, but here we are. General Allvin, I want to ask you a couple questions about sort of the changing on the battlefield, the use of drones, unmanned support. And there's a lot of conversation and discussion about that being for 5th gen and 6th gen platforms, F-47s, which we're very happy about in St. Louis. Will CCA be able to integrate, in your view, with sort of 4.5 generation platforms like the F-15EX? Is that something you contemplate?
You use the right term. We're definitely contemplating at the threshold platform that we're looking for right now to be able to have those 2, which, by the way, we have 2 of them that are prototyping very strongly right now to integrate with the F-35 and the F-22, and obviously it'll be sort of born to integrate with the F-47. Some of that we will look at the integration challenges and opportunities to go back with the 4.5th gen, but the more we can, the better, because the sooner we start our Air Force on this human machine teaming piece, the better off we're going to be as far as better cost exchange ratios, as well as better combat capability.
Dr. Meink, I wanted to ask you, we've heard a bunch of times, and I think it's pretty well known, the the role the legacy F-15E has played in recent operations in the Red Sea. Still incredibly valuable, still very important. Would you still agree, and there's a balancing act here, right? It's the F-37 is the future, but we have these, legacy platforms. Would you agree, though, they still play a very, very important role?
Yes, Senator. It's been demonstrated time and time again that those platforms are very effective and provide significant combat capability. Obviously, there are areas where they are challenged, right, and would not be the primary, but that doesn't mean they don't provide operational capability in many cases.
And I want to ask you something that obviously plays into the our national defense, but somewhat parochial. At Whiteman Air Force Base, we're the B-2, we've got the B-21, obviously on its way. You've got the A-10 that's being phased out, and that's coming pretty quickly now. That the F-15E could be a suitable bridge before you have a longer-term solution like the F-15EX as a follow-on mission there. Dr. Meink. Maybe.
Oh, go ahead. So I think that's one of the location that's on the list for competing for future fighter wings. Yes, Senator.
General Allvin, would you agree with that?
I would. I think I'm really in close contact with Lieutenant General John Healy, too, the Air Force Reserve Command Commander, and looking at opportunities for, staying in the global strike community, the B-2, B-21, and how many we're going to buy of those, and is there a better association there? But specifically to the A-10, well, more resources available, that's where we look at where we might be able to place and offset the loss of the A-10. Those are all things that, more Air Force, we might be able to pursue.
One of the and I wanted to speak with you, and we'll have plenty of conversations, General Allvin, about this, I think, down the road, but was disappointed that the 139th Airlift Wing did not get the C-130Js. It's been St. Joe's ready. They do, ironically, do the training for other, like when the country of India comes in to train on the C-130Js, they do the training for the C-130Js, but do not have the C-130Js. I'm not going to put you on the spot right now on this, but we thought it was going to happen this go around. Will you commit to working with me to make sure that actually we land that plane?
Senator, 100%. What we do, what we can provide to you is an understanding of where the areas were, where it didn't compete well and where it did compete well. That's what we try and do it with all of these when we go from the enterprise definition to the candidate location to the preferred location, to be able to understand where some of those discriminators were and give you a sense of, hey, if there's something that might make this particular location more competitive next time around, this is where it might be. I think we owe you that, and we'll certainly be happy to do that.
Well, I look forward to doing that again because we took those comments to heart and I think addressed those issues, but we'll continue to work with you. Thanks for your service. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Schmidt. Senator Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't going to ask about this, but General Allvin, the dumbing down of the conversation about the Air Force One from Qatar, I think deserves some more attention. Can you talk about whether it's a domestically made aircraft or an aircraft that is gifted to us from Qatar, wherever that aircraft might come from, there would be major security protocols before the commander-in-chief would fly on that airplane. Isn't that correct?
Yes, Senator, that's correct. And I think if it's possible, because of anytime we're talking about things having to do with the security of the commander-in-chief, if we can do that at the closed session, there are many more things.
Totally understand, but the public deserves to know that major security protocols would happen no matter where the plane comes from.
Yes, Senator.
Right, and the public can be assured of that being the case because the United States Air Force isn't going to allow the President of the United States to fly on a plane that isn't secure.
Yes, Senator, we will comply with the requirements for his security and all those that are given to us by the White House.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Secretary, we've talked about this before, but can you talk about just how important the Air National Guard and the Air Force Reserves are to you in this administration and what kind of goals we have over the next 4 years to strengthen those important institutions might be?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Before I do that, I just want to make sure that this airplane was the one that we're talking about here was actually domestically produced. That
Understood.
It is a 747
right.
platform.
Understood.
Just like the current platforms are. Yeah, with respect to the Air National Guards and Air Reserves, yeah, I actually was in the reserves, so I have a long history of working in that environment. I think it's critical across the board. I think we've already had a number of discussions where additional aircraft are either being aircraft are being modernized within the Guard and Reserve Force, and or new aircraft are being brought into the Guard and Reserve. So yeah, it has always been and will continue to be a key part of the Department of the Air Force's strength combat capability. As you know, from the Space Force perspective, there's a lot of transition going on. General Saltzman maybe talked to that a little bit.
Yeah, in accordance with the NDAA, the transfer of the space capabilities that in the Air National Guard are going to flow into the Space Force, and we're working on all the planning because those capabilities are critical. The work that's being done, both in the Air Force Reserve and the Air National Guard for space is critical.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Last month, as you know, the president came to the Midwest, and he spoke at Selfridge Air National Guard Base, as Senator Slotkin alluded to a moment ago, and he said, quote, "The previous administration was willing to surrender Air National Guard fighter units across the country by retiring aircraft that were not being replaced. But under the Trump administration, we're correcting that injustice." Mr. Secretary, can you talk about the president's direction on the need to invest more in these Air National Guard fighter units, which are important to me, whether it's Michigan or Indiana or across the country? Can you talk about what that investment looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that and many of the other president's comments kind of reiterate his perspective on the importance of bringing more air combat power into the service, and as General Allvin has been championing. So I think, as we bring more of that combat capability in, as we build out more aircraft, both in the active duty units, but also in the reserve units and guard units, that will be critical to get those platforms into those locations.
And General Allvin, as we see this investment and the focus by this administration, what should Air Guard units around the country be doing at the moment to prepare for the future? Even though there might be a transition to a F-15s in Michigan or F-16s in Indiana, what does an Air National Guard base need to do now to prepare for F-35s, F-47s down the road?
Senator, I say the short answer to that is really what they have been doing, which is ensuring that they maintain the quality of their aircrew, the quality of the maintenance, the quality of the support that has made them an integral part of our ability to deploy and fight overseas for the last, quarter century and before. So I think the Air National Guard, and of course working as a total force, because we are a total force, they continue to integrate into our deployment scheme. The Air National Guard is integrating into our new deployable combat wing scheme. So they are, much like the Air Force Reserves, they are transforming right along with the rest of the Air Force. And as we do that, then we're able to have a more balanced and even approach to modernizing our Air Force. I think they're doing all the right things.
Appreciate that very much. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator. This concludes what I would say has been a very informative, open portion of today's hearing. I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony. For the information of members, questions for the record will be due to the committee within 2 business days of the conclusion of the hearing. We will commence the closed portion of this hearing in Senate Security at 12:25.
Ready?